for joining. So glad to see all of my sport club friends. Feels so nice to be back. This is the third rendition of the NIRSA Ideas in Motion Sport Clubs Roundtable. My name is Chad Zimmerman. I serve as the Senior Assistant Director for Sport Clubs at the University of Texas at Austin. As people trickle in, I'll just share a little bit of welcome notes, and then we'll get right into content and having everybody share. I have the privilege of moderating today's discussion alongside Sarah Hawkins and Wendy Sheppard. Sarah, if you could please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Hawkins, she, her, hers, and I'm the coordinator for clubs and organizations and the advisor to club sports at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California.
And Wendy, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. My name is Wendy Sheppard. I'm the Assistant Director of Sports and Risk Management at the University of Richmond in Virginia.
Thanks again, everybody, for joining. We by no means want to be the only three people just talking the whole time. We are just here to help moderate the discussion and help lead some different topics today. So before we get going, a few different expectations for our time together. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the NIRSA website, as well as the chat feature. That function is also recorded, if you will, and posted to the website. So please feel free to utilize that chat function for anything you want to add to the group discussion, if you have questions or just different ideas that you want to share. And also feel free, everybody is muted just to keep the meeting going, but if you have something to say or ask, please unmute yourself and feel free at any time to jump in. It is an open space for any questions that you have related to sport clubs, but we do ask when you post a chat, put your institution with whatever your post is, just because when you go back on the website, it's really makes it easier for us to kind of understand either your question or the situation that you're discussing. We have a few established learning outcomes for today. First, we want to share ideas and knowledge regarding the impact of COVID-19 on sport club operations. Those are, I'm sure that will be a part of most of our discussions, or at least a portion of everything throughout. 2, staying connected with and supporting our sport club students. 3, navigating the work from home schedule in life and expectations with our universities. And 4, most of all, whatever you want to review today or cover specifically, if there's a question that you really want to see covered. We had quite a few come through at the end of the last chat that we hope to start with today, but if there's a new resource that you would like to share or anything like that, please feel free. Finally, this is a safe space in uncertain times, so we want to make sure everybody's respectful to all participants. We know that it's a very fluid situation for everyone. It's different state by state, region by region. So anything that's said today is likely to remain fluid. So to get started, we want to see what level of involvement everyone has had with these ideas in motion before. We'll have a quick poll come across your screen that will ask if you've attended a NIRSA Ideas in Motion before. And while we gather responses there, some of the topics we've reviewed in the last 2 sessions, we talked about virtual engagement with our students. We reviewed budget allocations and presentations and how to do those remote. We discussed equipment return, purchasing and freezing of funds, and then how to collect refunds or obtain refunds. We talked about remote officer transition, and we covered some national governing body discussion that we're actually going to get started with first here today. Can we see the results of that poll real quick just to see what our audience is looking like? All right, cool. So right now, about 79% or 80% returning. Thanks for joining us again. Glad to see you. And 20% new. So it's awesome to have some new people involved in the discussion. It'll be really great to cover some different sport club topics. So our first topic will be led by Sarah and our national governing bodies.
Great, thanks Chad for getting us started. And for those of you who indicated that you haven't come to one of these before, make sure you check out the recordings online because there really was some really good information shared at those first two roundtables. And we want to thank Laura especially for coordinating those for us. So I have this idea that's been stewing around in my head since last summer's Sport Club Institute about how we could keep an updated database of information from the national governing bodies that are represented by our different sport clubs. And this really solidified for me last week where I had this idea that what if we each volunteer to reach out to one national governing body as an ambassador for NIRSA? And so what I'd like to do is collect volunteers that you would be assigned one national governing body. You would reach out to them and try to get some basic information, and we would give you the questions to ask them so you know what we're looking for, and then you'd be able to fill in a form and all that information would be compiled into a live database that all of us could access. And going forward beyond the coronavirus pandemic, I see this being helpful where we could compile different coaching requirements from NGBs and things like that. But for now, I think a lot of us have questions about what are these national governing bodies going to do in light of the coronavirus situation, and what decisions have they made so far about the fall season, if any? Have they changed their eligibility? Are there going to be penalties if teams cannot participate? And so what we've done is we've put together a form for each of you to indicate which national governing bodies you might be willing to reach out to. So I'm going to share my screen with all of you, and we're going to take a look first at the form together. We did our best, Chad and Wendy and I, to look at all the different national governing bodies that might be represented. So I'm just going to go through them really, really fast. And if you could drop in the chat any that we're missing, I'll get those added. And then at the end of today's session, I will send the link out so that each of you can fill this out if you're willing to serve as one of these ambassadors. So we have Aikido, archery, badminton, ballroom or dance sport, baseball, bass fishing, bowling, basketball, both NCBA and NIRSA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, climbing, crew. I have it broken up into sections just because it's a long list. Cricket, cycling, disc golf, equestrian, IHSA and ISSRA, fencing, field hockey, golf, gymnastics, ice hockey, judo, karate, kendo, men's lacrosse, both NCLL and MCLA, women's lacrosse, paintball, pistol, powerlifting, Quidditch, racquetball, roller hockey, rugby, running, sailing, skeet and trap, ski and snowboard, soccer, softball, spike ball, surf, swim and dive, synchronized swimming, table tennis, taekwondo, tennis, triathlon, ultimate, volleyball, water polo, water ski wakeboard, wrestling, and wushu. So again, I know I went through those pretty fast, but we have a lot to get to today. But if there's any that strike you right now that you're like, oh, I have this team and it's not represented on that list, please send it to me in the chat and I will get it added to the form before we send it out. And then there's also a place to add other options. So if later today or later when you're looking at this form and you think of another NGB that we need to add, you can add it there and we'll make sure to get it in. Once you submit your response, if you're willing to serve as an ambassador, I'll send you more instructions about which NGB you're assigned to and a link to the form to fill out so that you can see what questions we want to ask them. Does anyone have any questions about it at this time?
Hi, Sarah. This is Max Miller from Swarthmore College. I have a question, and has it been in your thought process for this outreach to be done before or after the NCAA develops their policy for fall 2020? Because I'm sure that a lot of these national governing bodies are going to wait for the NCAA to make the first move before they create their specific policy related to fall 2020.
I agree. I think that it's worthwhile to start on the research now, but that decision is going to be play a big role, but I don't think we have a timeline on when that decision is going to be made. One of the questions that will be in the form to ask them is, what information, if you haven't made a decision yet, what guidelines are you waiting for? Are you waiting for CDC guidelines? Are you waiting for the NIRSA or NCAA guidelines? So that's part of the information we're going to collect. But I think it's worthwhile to start reaching out now, just so we have this conversation and this relationship going, and we can always update the information. That will be, this role of ambassador will kind of be an ongoing thing, where once this situation calms down, we want to reach back out to them and then look more into the things I was mentioning before, like what are coaching requirements or things like that.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, that was just a screen share. That's not a link for you to submit yet. I see that there's some extra NGBs that have been added in the chat. Thank you. And so I'll get those changes incorporated by the end of the session, and then I'll send that link out to everyone.
Sarah, could you also briefly discuss some of the questions that we might consider asking these governing bodies?
Yeah, of course. So the things we're going to ask on this round are, what policies do you have in place for fall, if any? Do you have a timeline for how you're going to handle practices and or competitions? Are you making any changes to your membership requirements or dues structure? And if, let's say they have a fall season and one school isn't allowed to participate, will they be penalized in any way? And then will that affect eligibility for future seasons? So the questions will revolve around those subjects. And so now, before we transition to our next slide, Nick's got another poll for us. This one is going to be on whether your institution has made any decisions regarding sport club activities for the fall. So Nick, if you could send that poll out for us. So we've got a couple of options here. Are you proceeding as normal? Have you formally decided to reduce sport club activities? Have you already canceled them? Or are you in a position that no decisions have been made yet? So shoot us that answer, and then we'll go over the results together in just a moment.
Along with that too, if anybody has suggestions besides what Sarah mentioned for questions to pose to these governing bodies, we don't want to overwhelm them with a large list, but I think if we can consolidate, 5 or 6 main bullets or bits of information that we're seeking, please feel free to shout that out in the chat or speak up.
We'll give it just a few more seconds. Has everyone gotten that poll submitted?
I have a quick question. This is Logan with the Spikeball Round Association. Will y'all be sharing these results? Because it's something we'll actually be interested in learning how other people are handling it as well.
That's something I'll consult with NIRSA on, but I would imagine that if you have a NIRSA membership and you're eligible to look in our NIRSA Connect newsletters, that you'd be able to see the information.
Perfect.
Yes, I don't know if we'll be able to send the form out to every attendee today, but we will certainly be posting it to the NIRSA Connect. So be on the lookout for it there in the next couple days.
Okay, Nick, if you want to go ahead and close that poll for us, and we'll take a look at what everyone has to say. So that's exactly what I expected to see. No decisions have been made yet. And that's why we're all here today, right? None of us have guidance from our institutions. Who was the one or two maybe that said that sport clubs have already been canceled? Do you mind sharing what institution that's at? Well, let's go ahead and transition into planning for fall with not a lot of information. So Wendy, why don't you get us started on how we can move into fall with no guidance?
Right, and that's going to be the interesting part. I know that we're all frustrated with how our semesters are ending, but we are people that need to plan for the future. And it looks like 96% of us have not made a decision yet on what our fall is going to look like. So we need to proceed at this moment as normal and start to make some considerations about what our training is going to look like. And I know at the University of Richmond, we're bouncing a lot of different ideas off of each other. And actually, before we get into that, why don't we have another poll question that we want to put up. If we can put that poll question up about our officer training to see what other universities are doing, whether or not you're planning to do regular in-person sessions, if you're doing a combination of online video or in-person meetings, or if you've switched, at this moment that you're going to do all online and interactive sessions that way, or if you're like many of us, you're just still waiting to hear what your university is planning to do. I know we are, I'm sure like many others at our campus, we are looking to look at some sort of a hybrid activity. Maybe a combination is going to be the best way for us to move forward, depending on the sizes of your councils, of your officer trainings, and those advisor meetings. I know that at this moment on our campus, we're looking at trying to limit as many meetings as possible face-to-face in an attempt to keep people safe. So we're still looking for some guidance there, but I'd be really interested to see what you guys are doing. We'll give a couple of seconds more for people to answer that poll. But I know that this would be a great opportunity if some of your campuses are already doing online trainings. Maybe, I know we've talked about this in some of our other roundtables, but what online program you like to use? Maybe you could throw some suggestions in the chat box of what online options that you have that have worked well for you, or you can share what you've tried that maybe the students didn't like, so we can maybe steer clear of those on our campuses.
One quick note, Wendy.
Yeah.
With those polls, a couple of our polls will be like a select all that apply. So if a box appears, you can check off multiple. If it's a circle, you'll check off one, just to help us collect some different data. But we're getting some good responses in the chat too in regards to decision making. Excellent.
If we can go ahead and put up the results for that poll, let's see what we got here. Yep. All right. So does anyone want to share what they're doing on their campus? I mean, obviously, it looks like you got a pretty decent split for people that are doing some combination and the all online interactive. I'd really like to hear from a couple people that are maybe going all online, maybe some suggestions that they have. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share?
One good post I see in the chat from Max again, actually, is the ACHA article that we do have. If we get time to it, around to it, we'll post the link at the end of this presentation that Max also posted for the ACHA considerations for reopening.
All right, we can go ahead and take that poll down. All right. So we'll switch on to the next one. And Chad, if you're going to take this one.
So if differently than just our meetings or our lead trainings that we can host digitally, I would say, for the most part, or as ACHA is telling us to, if it's going to be more than 10 people, host it digitally. We can do that. But for practices and competitions, that's a different story. I've seen a couple chats come through about some mentions of schools considering in-state travel only, within conference only. I don't know if anybody has ideas or questions to share about practices and competitions before we get to some of our content.
Mac or Chad, I have one thing from William and Mary, where our senior leadership on campus asked us to come up with phased reopening, and so we have ideas for how we would do individual virtual team workouts as phase one, and then phase two being social distance practices with field paint or court markings to delineate spaces and scheduled access so that entry points are thinned out. And then phase three would be a more normal reopening of practices. Our senior leadership has not asked us to put in play travel or competitions. So I think we're a little bit cautious over here so far, unless there's a big change.
Thanks, Dan. I would just echo that as well. I know here at the University of Texas, we're working on a phased reopening plan too, where the sport club activities, or really any of our programmed activities, are starting in different phases. So very similar. It's sports specific almost, right? It's team contact sports versus individual contact sports versus indoor and outdoor, and everything in between. We'll post another poll here on your screen. Are your students or clubs allowed to request facility space for practices or events? Yes, no, yes with restrictions. Practices and events are treated differently, or still unsure. And I'm putting my money on that one, but let's just see.
I know on our campus at Richmond, we're not even giving access yet to our students to go online and attempt to reserve space yet, because we are all waiting for some type of guidance from our university and the state to determine what those social distancing guidelines are going to look like. But I'm sure a lot of you are having the same concerns that we are. The students are already starting to plan for their fall, and they're coming to us with questions and hope to plan a schedule as normal. And we have to be prepared to have those hard questions and tell them to be prepared to make some sacrifices as we get moving and we get back hopefully in the fall.
If we could display the results of that poll on the screen. Oh, a little bit different responses. So only 50% of us are unsure at this time about facility reservations. But of the 50% that have some answer, 20% or so are not allowing students or clubs to reserve facility space. The other 34-ish% is allowing it, but with some restrictions or some practice versus event differences. So thank you for answering that poll. I do see some good chat responses too, just for things to people to consider. The NCAA has had discussions about playing equity versus, so how can some states are allowed to play versus other states that aren't, and how that affects conference play, postseason competition. That should be interesting moving forward. Quite a few of you are chiming in the chat. If anybody in the chat wants to speak on their situation, please feel free.
So here at Minnesota, we are continuing kind of business as usual with all of our intramural and club sport reservations. And the reason why is, with us being kind of a landlocked area, there's a lot of need for space. And so we want to be able to at least have that stuff in place for if we come back to fall and it's kind of business as usual, and then we kind of adjust out from there, because we have so many different areas requesting space. And then as our facility starts to get their guidelines in place of what spaces are going to be repurposed for fitness equipment or classrooms, we'll adjust from there, just so we're not behind the 8 ball. And by the time we get back to campus, we're now scrambling to try to put all those measures into place in a short amount of time.
We're doing something similar at Richmond. We're allowing them to reserve space for practices, so that we're not going to be all fighting over space when we get back. There'll be a mad rush, but that is all we're allowing at this moment. We're not allowing any facility reservations for competitions yet. And I'm sure it's going to look differently once we do have those guidelines in place. We'll have to make a lot of changes.
At Central Washington, we are following what our varsity athletics is doing. So no decision will be made for fall activity until that decision is made, just so we are showing a united front that sport clubs or athletics isn't getting special treatment one way or another.
One thing that I would like to discuss real quickly before we move on, Wendy, is how we treat off-campus clubs. So at the University of Texas, we have about a dozen or so clubs that do not utilize university facilities, but are either in local community facilities, or it's cycling. They're out and about. So I was wondering if anybody has either started to put policies in place or just general thoughts to help us guide those clubs?
I know on our campus, I've started to reach out to some of the facilities that are off campus to see. Obviously, a lot of ours are considered non-essential, and they have not been given permission to open yet. And until our state opens in a phase, they are on hold. So that's all they're telling me right now. Obviously, you know, as things start to reopen, that will be it'll be an easy decision to make if a facility remains closed in the fall for certain activities. And whatnot, but we're a lot of it's going to be contingent also on what the facility will allow.
Chad, it's Max Miller here again from Swarthmore College. Is anybody working with their like Office of Student Organizations or student activities specific to club sports, since they might have like dual jurisdiction, or they might need to be approved as student organizations prior to falling under campus rec or something like that?
That's what I'm in talks weekly with our student, ours is the student activities department to determine, and we're in the same holding pattern that they are. They're waiting for the university to make a determination on what they want us to do as a whole, and then we'll make decisions based on that within our department.
Before we move on to our next topic, is there any other thoughts or questions on the topic of practices and competitions? Okay, thank you. And I think, you know, if we're able to have a part 4 of our roundtable in another couple weeks, hopefully some of our answers may be coming a little bit more clear from university decision making and things like that. And again, the chat has been really useful. That will be saved to the NIRSA website. So please feel free to continue interacting with us in the chat.
Okay, first off, before we get into travel, I just want to say thank you to everyone who added national governing bodies to the chat. I took a look and made sure to add the ones that we were missing, and I think I got all of them. So that form is now ready for submission. So I'm going to post a link in the chat. We'll also share this link on the NIRSA Connect for anyone that wasn't able to join us today. But anyone that is willing to, you know, take a few minutes to become a national governing ambassador, please do fill out that form. We'd really appreciate it. But now I want to talk a little bit about travel. And Nick's got a poll for us, if he could bring that up, whether your state currently has a travel restriction in place. And this is one where you can select multiple answers if that's applicable to your school. I know for us at Cal Poly, all of the CSU campuses, there's 23 campuses in the state of California, all under the guidance of the CSU Chancellor's Office. And our travel is restricted until June 30th. It was originally May 31st, but it got extended. And then just yesterday, our Chancellor announced that almost all classes will be online for the fall. Not necessarily that campuses are closed, but that classes would be online and only certain labs and things would be in person. So that gives me a little bit more of a sense of the interactions I'm going to be having with students in the fall, and whether some teams are even going to be able to field a roster even if they are allowed to play or practice. So that's something that's factoring in for me, but I know we're all in different states and we all have different guidelines. So go ahead and just take a few last seconds to submit your answers if you haven't yet. And then Nick, if you could bring those answers up from us, we really appreciate Nick's support at NIRSA, running our polls and our tech for us today. So it looks like the majority of us are unsure. That maybe that means we're anticipating some travel restrictions will come in. Some are limited by distance, some by state, and some don't have any restrictions yet. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out as this changes and we get more information. For anyone that does have travel restrictions already in place, if you want to share what situation you're in, either in the chat or by unmuting yourself, I'd be curious to see, you know, has your school put a date on it, or what is the distance, if it's by distance?
Hey there, this is Jarrell at Western Kentucky University. For us, our entire university has had all travel restricted for the entirety of the next fiscal year. There
Wow.
are questions though, because the way that they're doing it is what they're saying is that you cannot have travel funded, rather that whether it's for students, staff, faculty, doesn't matter. But we also still have a lot of questions and are looking for clarification as to, are you saying that we cannot give funding to student organizations for that travel, even though right now technically the guideline is saying that it's still okay to travel, but you don't get the money from it.
Sure. And then what about student dues and fundraising money, and will they be allowed to use those funds for travel? We've had some problems with that in California the last few years as well.
Yeah, we're kind of in the same boat in that for us, we use off-campus accounting. So technically for those funds, you know, they have nothing to do with the university, but they're still really treated as university funds. So a lot of questions.
Very interesting, and that's a topic that always comes up at Sport Club Institute. I know this summer's has been postponed to next summer, but I hope to see all of you there because it is really the most valuable conference you'll ever attend if you've never been. It's so specific to what we do every day, and you get so much good information. So I really do hope to see you all there. But thank you, Jarrell, and I hope that that's interesting that they've extended the ban for the whole year. Has anyone else had a ban go that far, a travel restriction go that far, or are most of you just looking at the fall if you do have a restriction?
Yeah, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Tom Giles. I'm at Florida International University down in Miami. They dropped the bombshell on us about all university travel and then made a very quick comment that also included event fees. So they don't want the students traveling both for the health reasons, but also for the financial burden. So we're waiting for like the official clarification on it, but for professional staff, it is 100%. There's no travel for 2021. For CSO clubs, they have also given them the ban for the 2021 year, but for whatever reason, they left sport clubs out of that initial reasoning. We already don't fund their travel through reimbursement, so the only thing we can pay for is their event fees, but we're just waiting to get additional clarification on it, but we're making plans that our sport clubs won't be able to travel in 2021.
Sure, and it's information like that that's going to really play into our national governing body's decisions, because if teams can't travel, they can't compete, and if there's not enough teams to compete, then we can't set up these leagues. And it's really, there's so many pieces that have to come together to give us answers here. Thank you to everyone that's sharing. Wow, I mean, I hope that our school doesn't do that, but you know, I wouldn't be super surprised if they did.
Hi, Sarah. This is James Alexander at Loyola Chicago. You know, one of the factors that I'm seeing that could come into play here, especially, and I'm seeing at our university, is the universities are looking at massive budget shortfalls for the next year. And because of that, I think the ripple effect is that travel across the board is one of the easy cuts, right? That's one of the expenses they can eliminate. You know, we are potentially, my whole department is student fee funded. And we don't know if we're going to be on campus or not. If there are no students on campus, no student fees will be collected. We may not even have a program other than what the students can come up with on their own as far as finances go. And I wonder, as we get closer to this time frame, especially with everyone's fiscal year starting over the summer, or mostly over the summer, you know, how much of this will start to come into play. And we may not know this until deeper into the summertime.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the fiscal impact has led a lot of schools, like I'm in the middle of a budget freeze right now, and I'm sure that will continue. And so professional development travel is going to be more difficult to justify going forward. But on the same time, because our allocations to our club sports provide such a small percentage of their budget. About 8% of the club sport budget comes from the university or the student government, and the rest is all fundraise and dues. And so because the college isn't really paying for travel, they don't have a reason to restrict it with the clubs. But it'll be interesting to see if they still make the decision like we're currently in. We're currently prohibited from allowing students to travel officially, not for financial reasons though, just for health reasons. Great feedback, everyone. This is obviously an ongoing conversation, and information is going to continue to change. And NIRSA Connect is a great way for us to collaborate together on that. But right now, I want to move on to another topic. Chad, can you talk about more sport-specific policies?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And I know in the chat, there's lots of good discussion going on. I think one key point I'd like to point out throughout all of these topics is it's important to reach out to your student activities or student organizations or wherever that department may lie on your campus, because I know maybe not all of us, but most of us are working with sport clubs in that realm, in the student organization realm. And we want to make sure that there's an equitable, approach to all of this, and you're not butting heads with other people on campus over, different bits of information or policies related to travel or whatnot. So sport-specific policies is just a little bit more of a discussion on practices and competitions. Daniel actually mentioned it earlier from speaking about the different phases that we'll probably be opening our practices or events in. And I was just wondering if schools have, or campuses have thought about taking that approach with different sports. So we're looking at, sports like archery that can be done outside with social distancing guidelines easily in place, that can start pretty early, versus obviously contact sports such as soccer or rugby, maybe only going through conditioning workouts until we can have more. I imagine most are doing similar activities right now, but I was wondering what other thoughts might be out there about sport-specific policies.
A question I have about sport-specific policies, kind of to the floor, is anyone involving students in planning stuff like this, or are you doing like I'm doing and just kind of waiting until we have definitive information so as not to really like scare or throw them off? I'm just kind of waiting and planning behind the scenes, but I wondered if anyone was engaging with their student leadership at this point already.
Daniel, I can answer to that a little bit. At Cal Poly, I'm meeting with each of my captains one-on-one to explain to them where I ranked their team in terms of risk of contact, just to give them a heads up that, maybe the rugby team isn't practicing this fall, or if you do, it's going to look considerably different than it has in the past. And I want to know what they're willing to take on as restrictions. So some teams have given me honest feedback where they're like, look, if you're going to make us wear gloves and do less than 10 people, then we just don't want to have practice for the fall. Versus other teams are like, yeah, we're willing to wear masks, we're willing to do this. And so I think it is important to take it sport by sport and captain by captain to see what they want and what they're willing to do.
Hi, I'm at Illinois State. We haven't reached out specifically to students yet because we just don't have answers for them yet. And so we've told them plan for fall like normal, but obviously expect things to drastically change. But the group we have been communicating with is our executive board, because while we don't know what we can and can't do in the fall, we will know we need to do something. So really getting them to brainstorm some different activities that we could do. If clubs can't play, can we still engage them? How would we still engage them? The officers specifically, do we pivot to just do a broad leadership program if we can't compete? So using that group to really just be the voice for the program as they're intended and get some ideas working, and having them build out some ideas for different programming if competition can't happen.
This is Mike from Grand Valley State in Michigan. One thing that we've been discussing, if our clubs cannot travel or compete, to model some skill development programs that are similar to how our group exercise schedule is run. We would have more oversight in terms of checking participants in, making sure that they're screened, more than just leaving them off on their own to have practice with minimal oversight. Just some ideas we've been tossing around here.
Thank you, Michael. I know that our facility counterparts are certainly engaged in probably more of those discussions than I am, but I mean, something that we're considering for practices for sure. We're looking at like a person per square footage models. So, as your martial arts room, if you have one of those, if it's, say it's 2,000 square feet, then you have to cap your practices at 20 people or 40 people or whatever that number is, right? So I think that fundamentally changes the structure of administering practice for a lot of our sports if those restrictions are in place.
Hey everyone, this is Nora from Spikeball. So on the NGB side, we've canceled our season, not college related, so far through June. And a big thing for us is like, how far are we willing to go? If we can host events, but everyone has to take their temperature before, if everyone has to wear masks, all that stuff. So right now for us, it's not worth having the event if it can't be at the level we all want. So that's kind of how we're looking to the fall and what we're hosting. On one side, we want the clubs to follow their college's guidelines. If the college says they can't play, then we don't want to have them either. At some point, how many teams can't play that we don't have anything? Yeah, and at what level of risk are we willing to take as an NGB to bring people together, and what do we want to be responsible for? So there's so many factors going into this, but I appreciate all of your input on what you guys are seeing as well.
It's good to hear from our national governing bodies too. Thank you, Nora. Yeah, any other thoughts just before we move on sport specific policies?
Chad, let me join in. My name's Aubrey Jones. I'm from George Washington University and probably one of the elder statesmen on this call. And I do watch Dr. Fauci on CNN a lot. And being realistic, there's no way in hell that we are going to be able to have rugby playing this fall. Based upon everything I hear, you can put masks on, you can do everything you want, but in rugby, masks are going to fall off. You can't play rugby without a scrum. I just want to be realistic with our students, and the NCAA football will be a big determining factor on what goes on campuses this fall and what they decide. But right now, I don't see intramurals and club sports as being a viable option in September, October, maybe later. And again, I'm rooting like hell that a vaccine will come along sooner rather than later. But it's kind of a dreary thing right now for all us to think about. But we have to be realistic with all of our club leaders.
One thing to keep in mind here too is our role in supervising club sports, all of us, isn't just about letting them compete. It's also about giving these students a healthy and physical outlet to maintain their emotional and physical health. And so what are the ways that we can encourage that in a virtual or hybrid environment? And so yes, I agree with Mr. Jones that rugby is just not going to happen in the fall. But that being said, could smaller practices on conditioning drills only take place? Or can we develop virtual challenge calendars to engage our teams and give them credit for that? I've created one for the spring quarter for my athletes. If anyone's wanting to see what that looks like, feel free to shoot me a message or an email. I'd be happy to share that with you. But I've had my athletes out there doing thousands of burpees and thousands of push-ups and taking team pictures on Zoom and things like that, just to give them something to do and a reason to stay engaged with each other, so that they don't lose that team or that sense of connection to each other during this time. And that may be that may be more important than whether or not they can compete against each other. Would anyone agree, disagree? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I definitely agree with you, Sarah. I know that a lot of the reasons our students stay on campuses is because of the connections that they make with their teammates on sport clubs, and we need to give them a safe outlet. And I completely agree with Mr. Jones as well, with the restrictions that we're going to have to, for their own safety, we have to make some of these decisions for them to keep them safe and to keep things moving. But I know that we are really pushing on our campus to find ways to allow them to practice safely, to interact safely, so that they have that mental health aspect is so important, and for them to have that support system that they need on campus with all the other things that are still going to be affecting them, you know, with the stress management, with the classes, with this pandemic going on. This outlet is going to be really important. And I think that if we restrict them to the point where we don't offer any outlet, they're going to find a way to do it in an unsafe way. And that's my biggest concern.
All good points. I appreciate the directness of Aubrey too. I mean, there's some difficult conversations ahead. I think the conversations with the rugby leaders will be different than the badminton, for example. And some I see in the chat are discussing the challenges of an equitable approach, but that's just tough because not every sport is the same. So I guess it's just going to be decisions that'll have to be made on a really local level. So moving on, we do have a couple more topics to cover with the group today, and we still have the opportunity to take any questions that we haven't covered so far as well, if anybody wants to poke at the group with something that we have not posed yet. Okay, well, our next topic is shared facilities. Wendy, if you want to take that one.
Do you want to, we have that quick poll really quick about whether or not they're restricting which clubs practice?
Yes, please actually pull it up. I missed that in my notes. Thank you.
So we'll see if anybody is already planning to restrict which clubs, since we can't, some of them won't allow for social distancing. I agree with a lot. Obviously, it sounds like a lot of the conversations that we're having that's going to be an inevitability unless some ridiculous miracle happens between now and August. I think that is an unfortunate consequence of where we are. But I'm sure a lot of people are still waiting to make that final decision. So why don't we put the results of that poll up and see what everyone is thinking right now.
More uncertainty.
Yeah, so over half of the group is unsure, and it looks like, but about almost 40% of us are saying that, yeah, they're definitely going to be having to restrict some practices. If the 1% doesn't think that's going to be necessary and wants to share on why you feel that way, that would be great.
So over at William and Mary, we were told to come up with something that each club can do socially distanced, no matter how close to their sport that looks like, because not having a plan for clubs to do something was not an allowable answer. So we came up with something for everybody to do.
I think that's great. That's fantastic. That's a great plan.
I really like that too. And we may just need to take the perspective that our club sports are going to be more like regular clubs this year.
Yeah.
And regular clubs still hang out and talk on Zoom and have movie nights. And I'm seeing some of my teams do that right now. I mean, it's hard to find movies about fencing to watch, but why can't you just watch it like a stupid movie together? It doesn't have to be specifically related, but just anything to keep them engaged and feeling a sense of community, because all the students I've talked to in the last few weeks just feel very isolated and very alone right now.
One thing that our men's volleyball team at Central Washington is doing is they're actually reaching out to different professional members within their sport. So this week they're talking to 2 members from the Team USA Volleyball and just hearing about their journey through volleyball. What are some things they can continue to do while, you know, personal practices, things like that. So I'm super pumped that they took that on themselves and started reaching out, but it's something we're encouraging our other clubs to do, is find that team activity that they can continue even from a distance.
Samantha, could you post that in the chat too for us? That's a great idea. That is really awesome.
Will do.
And Samantha, that encourages me to add another question to my NGB survey, is maybe we could ask the NGBs if they'd be willing to put something together like that, that we could send out to our students and they could log into a webinar or a Zoom meeting and get a chance to meet professional athletes. I feel like celebrities and athletes and everyone has been so giving of themselves during this time because they have more free time, but they understand everyone's in that situation. So I think it would be a great opportunity to get some, professional athletes or really high-ranking athletes to talk to our students.
I think that's a great idea.
A couple of good points in the chat that did come through, I just want to highlight was the differences between clubs and athletics and our ability to maybe not shield or bubble our students as well when they're coming to and from practice. There was an interesting question posed about students that live off campus versus students that live on campus and their activity levels. But then also something that we haven't even discussed, posted about what are the referee official umpire association's plans for any of these competitions. I mean, if we're even able to play against one another, will we have somebody to be there and track fouls and actually officiate the game? That'll be interesting.
That is. All right. So we're just gonna shift over to shared facilities. I know that a lot of campuses, obviously we have a lot of things going on in different places on campus, and I know that this is something big that we're talking about on our campus is what constitutes a facility. We have 3 courts in our gymnasium. Do we count, if we do have a cap on our number of people, is that cap per court or per facility? If we have intramural fields or different fields that we use that we allow multiple groups to practice on. I know Chad brought up an interesting, concept that they were working on earlier, maybe looking at square footage and determining how many people are going to be in an area. But if there's some groups that are thinking about that or have some thoughts on that, we'd really like to hear it. And we have another poll that we want to put up about anyone that's using them. Are you planning on limiting or preventing clubs from using shared facilities that you guys can chime in on?
While you all are answering that poll, I'll just share one situation that we're in at Cal Poly that maybe some of you can relate to. We have a lot of access to facilities in our recreation center. Normally for club sport, we get priority scheduling in some of the dance studios and gymnasiums. However, at this time, our rec center has been taken over by the county as an alternative care site. It's been converted into a 600-bed hospital. And while no patients have been seen there yet, we don't know how long the county is going to keep possession of that facility. And so that's a big factor limiting some of our lower risk sports that we may be able to allow normally, like badminton. We can't because we don't even have that facility. So, everyone's in a different situation here. I'm definitely curious to see where everyone is with their facilities.
Let's see if we can put the results of that one up. All right, so we're looking at 73% don't know yet. That I would assume that. And 17% of you guys are saying that you are definitely going to limit or prevent them from using shared facilities, and around 10 are not. Does anyone want to share their thought process on that, or any of the suggestions that they have? Okay. I know on our campus that is, we're waiting for the final word, once again, from our university to determine what those numbers are going to look like. So that we're still in a holding pattern for that. But if that's going to be a big one, I know for a lot of campuses, depending on how spread out or how packed in they are with the number of facilities that they have to share. All right, and move on, unless anyone has anything they want to add. Okay. I did have one more question to the poll that we don't have a slide to, but I'd be really interested to hear if we can put the last poll question up. Is anyone considering using or having additional waivers or some type of risk management point with their students about covering the potential of getting infected with COVID by participating in any type of athletics? I'd just be curious to see that. That's a conversation we're having with our risk management. There's some talk on our campus of having a very broad, waiver that's going to be given to all students before they attend before they return in the fall, that would cover things like if you come into the gym to work out, there is a chance, you know, more likely of being infected than if you stay in your dorm and attend only Zoom classes, you know, things like that. And I don't know if this is something that we would need a second waiver for, or if it could be encompassed in this document that we are, by no means have we decided that we're going to do it, but that we are discussing on our campus. So if anybody would like to share what they're doing, and we can maybe put the results of that poll up real quick. So 56 no.
Wendy,
Yes.
could you really quick just refresh your page? I posted one more link to that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I just did that while we were chatting.
Okay.
Hopefully that works. While you post that, I'll just review the poll. So more uncertainty there, but about 40% of the group is considering adding additional waiver forms to cover possible COVID infection from participating. For those of you that answered yes, have you begun to draft that language, or you know how you'll implement that?
If someone has a document that they're working on, or when it gets approved, that would be something, if you could share, you know, on the Connect site or whatnot. I know that'd be something that I'd be very interested in seeing, and whatnot. That would be great.
I know our university, any changes to waiver would have to go through legal. We don't have a ton of control over they're changing it. But they did, they are pretty set in the fact that they don't want us to be taking anyone's temperature before participation. So they've sort of decided that that is not a route we can take in terms of screening participants. So I didn't know if anyone else had run into that with their legal, university legal, or what other routes they were kind of taking to make sure if participation can happen. I mean, there's only so many gloves that you can hand out and things. So what if it's just foregoing the activity altogether, if there are other sort of checkpoints.
Kelsey, what was their justification for not wanting you to do temperature screening?
That it's the same reason they don't let us have a return to play policy, that our students are athletes and they should make their own decisions. We're not medical professionals, and so therefore we can't use the temperature as justification for keeping them from an activity.
Thanks for sharing.
I know on our campus, I'm part of a committee that's looking at testing requirements for the fall for all students. And we've actually been drifting away from doing temperature checks because they can be misinterpreted. Depending on when you catch a student, you know, temperature can be affected or whatnot. And it is not being used. It's not effective in catching the students that are symptomatic are not the ones we're worried about, because they'll know, hopefully they're seeking medical attention or they're quarantining the way they're supposed to. We're trying to catch the students that are the non-symptomatic carriers, and the temperature check is not going to tell us anything. So a temperature check is not going to be as effective as we want it to be. So I know that right now that is not in the forefront of what policy we're going to end up with. Plus we're putting the onus on a lot of our students if they should be checking their own temperature regularly, so that if they're becoming symptomatic, they know what to do next after that. They shouldn't be doing it when they come to practice. They should have been doing it before they, you know, went to class or did the other things. So it won't be a specific for a sport club requirement. It would be a specific for a regular day on campus. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share before we move on real quick, before we finish up?
I know our chat has gotten very busy, and thank you everyone for your feedback. The chat will be uploaded with the recorded presentation. Thank you again to Nick at NIRSA for doing that. And I'm going to share the link to the National Governing Body Ambassador sign up form one more time in there. So if you missed that link earlier, please do fill that out if that's something that you're willing to take on.
Chad and I had provided some links here for some different guidelines that we're getting from some different groups. If I know that someone posted the ACHA guidelines earlier this week. If you have not had a chance to look at those, I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that. It's a very comprehensive document on how to open things in stages and what recommendations are being made by the American College Health Association. It's really a really helpful document, and we're going to post that link on the Connect as well. Again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you everybody. Just out of getting everybody moving along with their day for their next meeting, we will post these links to the NIRSA Connect. The NACA link is just a bunch of good questions to consider for advising student leaders and student organizations. And then the Chronicle link, you can find it by just going to the Chronicle of Higher Education main website. They have a list of colleges' plans for reopening in the fall that they're keeping track of. It's only about like our classes happening or not. It's not, you know, detailed specific about different policies, but still a very helpful, comprehensive list. And last but not least, obviously your state and your institution will be one of your main resources moving forward, but we hope to have another one of these in a couple weeks after we have some different information shared with us throughout the country. We really appreciate you taking the time today to join us. Please feel free to ask any final questions in the chat that we can consider for our next go round. But again, thank you very much. Everybody stay safe, take care, enjoy your day.
Bye everyone, thank you.
Thank you everyone, have a great rest of your day.